I grew up in Cedarburg. My parents were both teachers. My mother was a war bride. She was from Brussels, Belgium, and my dad was from Milwaukee, and they met during the war. And my mother came over and they got married. And so they settled into Cedarburg before I was born. And she was often the French and German teacher at Cedarburg High School. And my dad taught middle school the whole time I was growing up. And they were very involved in the community. And frankly, I always wanted to be a teacher like them. They were very well respected. And that's why I got a bachelor's and master's in teaching and ultimately went on to teach for a couple of years. I had a full-time job in Lake Zurich, Illinois, and I was teaching there for a couple of years. And there was a teacher's strike that was very nasty. It was for the first time I started thinking maybe I didn't want to teach. Then I tried to figure out what else I could do with my master's in teaching elementary ed and French. And, to this day, I don't know what made me think of law school. As I said, I'd never met a lawyer. I never talked to anybody about law school. And we moved back to my home area. And so I transferred to Marquette Law School and graduated there in 1975. I knew that I wanted to work with people. That's what I enjoy. So I like jury trials. That's why I like doing community work. And I really had thought about practicing in a small town, but small towns weren't really ready for women at that point. I got one interview and they wanted to know what my husband was going to do if I was going to get this job. And I didn't want to work in a big firm. I just knew that wasn't an environment that I wanted to spend my time in. And I got offered a job at Legal Aid Society Milwaukee, which was right across the street from the law school. And I took that job doing civil work then for a number of years and ultimately became the chief of that office, representing poor people in Milwaukee on every kind, no criminal, all civil work. And it was just a really rich experience for me because I was born and raised in a white suburb and, pretty sheltered from many of the issues that face people, particularly in a large city and particularly people of color. And so it was really, I couldn't have had a better training experience for my judicial career. I was teaching at the law school by that point. So I'd been out of law school about 5 years and also doing some legal aid. And the executive director of legal aid, his name was Tom Cannon, called me in one day and said, there's a judgeship opening. Governor Dreyfus has not appointed any women, and I think you'd be excellent, and I think you ought to apply. And I remember telling Tom, look, I don't have political ties. I'm pretty nonpartisan. I've just had my judicial community work. And he called up a newspaper reporter at the time, and Walter Fee was his name, and Fee covered the courts. And he said to Walter, so who's applied for that judgeship for Kessler? And Walter told him a bunch of names. And Tom said, well, they're not going to get it. Janine Geske is going to get it. And he hung up. Of course, Fee said, who the hell is that? And then Tom said to me, well, now you got to apply. I was on the circuit court bench for 12 years. I went through 2 elections, one contested, one uncontested. I like the uncontested better. I had applied for a federal court appointment, and it was during a Republican administration. And I won't go through all the details, but one of the things that happened in the discussion is somebody said we don't have any women on the Eastern District. And the head of the committee, one of them said, well, we don't vote for gender in here. And that was enough to push me out. And the guy it was a former dean at the law school, Frank DeGeer, who was so outraged that he encouraged me to apply for a Supreme Court opening. I took some time to think about that because I knew the court would be a very different experience than what I'd been used to with the rest of my legal career, and that I would miss people. I mean, there's not a lot of people interaction at the court. And what ultimately swayed me was there was nobody else from Milwaukee on that court. And I thought it was really critical that the Milwaukee experience, with all that brings in terms of everything from crime to busy court and my time in the prisons, because I'd spent time in the prisons. And I ultimately thought that, I really had something to give to the court. And the governor decided at the last minute to appoint me. And then I ran and was elected to a 10-year term. And I left after 5 years. The way I look at the world is we each have a vocation or have opportunities for vocation where our God-given skills and talents really can thrive. We can offer something to somebody that's extraordinary as opposed to some other areas where they're ordinary. And I ultimately was not really, I was unhappy, and I really had to spend time to figure out why I was happy. I liked the cases, I liked oral argument, but it was really the interaction with people and being in community, and even in being able to talk about issues. You know, the fact that suddenly you can't give an opinion on anything. The reasons to stay in the court were it was reputation, it was benefits, it was prestige, all those things. But everything that I loved and valued about interacting with people was somewhere else. And so I made the decision to leave the court after 5 years. And I didn't know what I was going to do when I made the announcement. I knew I wanted to do mediation, peace building, restorative, that kind of work, because that I was really drawn to that kind of work.
What are the issues or causes that you're really passionate about?
Well, I am, in a broad sense, it is facilitating peaceful dialogue amongst people who are at odds with each other. So whether it's victim offender, which, is clear incidental, or whether it's political disagreements, or whether it's racial issues, or whether, I've done a lot of talking circles in communities in the neighborhoods with police officers and people that live in the community and parolees coming back to the community. And we talk about, everybody tells a story of experience with violence. And it's one of the stories I always tell, is that one of those circles, almost everybody were people of color, but there was a white officer who talked about being called to a shooting, and I'll cut the story short, but he ran into the house and there was a 2-year-old little girl with a bullet hole in her forehead, and he picked her up and she took her last gasp of air in his arms. And as he sat in the circle and talked to everybody, he talked about how he could hear the sirens and the screaming, but he was just present to the death of this child, and how he dreamt about her and thought about her and talked to doctors and nurses, and is there something he could do? And then he looked at the people in the room and he said, I want you to know that every time I get called to a shooting, I take her with me. And, when people leave the room, and I told them afterwards, people are not going to think that cop doesn't care. I guess the 3 big issues I'd named. The second is the whole race issue going on, and the racial discord, the disrespect, the racism. The third is just generally education, teaching kids, our schools, our public schools, choice, all the issues that come with that. And having, we've got the racial issues, but we've got just the educational disparities and what are happening to kids in rural communities as well as in some impoverished communities in Milwaukee, and trying to find ways to better address those things. Yeah, and politics, I guess.
Why did you decide to join the State Journal editorial board?
I did for the same reason that I told you I joined the Supreme Court. I think I'd probably bring something different to the group. The one thing I didn't mention, I do want to mention, is the whole independence of the judiciary, which is a passion of mine. I have something to contribute on those topics. I worry about what's happening to our court system and whether it's going to survive our founders' desire to have it as an independent branch.